Right. I don't know whether people know me. I'm Henrice Altink. I am a Caribbean historian, but I'm also one of the co-directors of the Interdisciplinary Global Development Center. In the next 10 minutes or so, I want to make us consider the ways in which the humanities can help to address some of the major challenges in the world today. And one of the major challenges is climate change. This is an aerial view of the damage caused by Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas just last month. Climate change has meant that hurricanes are becoming more frequent and they're becoming more severe, so that's what you see happening. Climate change is also one of the main factors behind global migration streams today. For example, people that live in small island states, like in the Bahamas, they will face increasing sea level rises, coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion, and also more frequent and intense droughts, encouraging them to move. The UN has estimated that there could be anywhere between 25 million and 1 billion environmental migrants by the year 2050. That's how much of a pressing issue this is. Another key challenge facing today is food security. Food security, this problem is largely linked obviously to climate change with frequent droughts and so on, but it's also linked to population growth, and that's an estimate of what that will be like in the future. Population growth is also tied up in food security. They're also tied up to gender inequality, another major challenge. And again, estimations are that at the current rate, if we wanted to close the gender pay gap, it will take us to 2133. Now, there are numerous other global challenges ranging from conflict and poverty to inequality and a lack of education. Most of these challenges do affect the global south, but obviously they also affect us here in the global north. Climate change doesn't stop at borders. And of course, many of these global challenges, we ourselves here in the global north have done much to contribute to. Just think of our consumption patterns causing global warming, but our consumption patterns are also responsible, for example, for some of the forced and precarious labor in the world today. Now, the UN initially talked about millennium challenges and really presented these challenges, as you see them here, as challenges for the global south. But more thinking has meant that now we see them as truly global challenges. And these millennium challenges have been replaced by sustainable development goals, aimed for us to achieve them all over the world by all the UN member states by about 2030, the so-called Agenda 2030. And there are 17 of these. Roughly at the same time that the UN came up with these, that was in 2015, in the UK, the government set up a Global Challenges Research Fund. It's about £1.5 billion worth to support cutting-edge research, addressing global challenges, and that is for 5 years, so it will finish the first tranche at least in 2020. And roughly there are 3 major challenge areas, and if you read these through carefully, you see that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are somewhere in there. Now, shortly after this fund was announced, the university set up a GCRF steering committee. On that committee, myself and the Associate Dean for Research represent the faculty on that. And the reason for that is that a lot of these GCRF calls are cross-council calls. And the University of York has done a lot on being quite successful in bringing in money under these grants. And this is a slide, this is a link. If the slides are being circulated, you can see some of the amazing work that has been done and is going on in York around this. But sitting on this GCRF steering committee, I see every couple of months what bits have gone in from York. And what I've also been struck by is the lack of arts and humanities involvement in them, either as principal investigator or as co-investigator. And I also sit on the AHRC ODA college that looks at GCRF grants and Newton grants. And again, what I've noticed there is, yes, arts and humanities are involved, but they're usually there for the impact work. So somebody else has come up with a major technological innovation or a medical innovation, and then the arts and humanities is used to convey that innovation through a film or through a play, rather than actually using the arts and humanities as a means to generate research and knowledge that can help us then to bring about better policies and interventions. So what I want to convey then is that the humanities can play an important role in generating research that can directly feed into policy making. And I'm drawing here particularly on the kind of GCRF projects that I'm involved in or have been involved in, and some of you may be aware of these, and some of you are in the audience who are working with me on some of these projects. Now, what can the arts and humanities do then? There is now increasing recognition that any well-intended development intervention can fail if there is a lack of understanding of the cultures, the context in which they are being promoted, and the reception of their intended beneficiaries. So what we as humanities scholars can do is help to highlight the value of local knowledge, language, cultural assets and values, and also pay attention to the socio-economic and political context that can point to areas where change may be very difficult to achieve. For various development projects that I've been involved in, I have often been the only one that has actually regional expertise. So if you're an area scholar like me, and some of you may be that, it doesn't matter whether you're a specialist in history, in language or music, but because you visit that region for many years and you study it from your desktop or you read the local papers on an almost daily basis, you have knowledge of that region. You have knowledge of the complexities of these societies. So for example, one of the projects I'm involved in is looking into ensuring a coral reef in Grenada, the Caribbean, because coral reefs are a first defense against storm surges. Now, on that team, there are mathematicians, there are environmental scientists, there are insurance brokers because we work with an insurance company. But what these people don't have is the regional expertise. So what I bring in then is to say, well, hold on, if you want to do that, consider, for example, the identity of the fishermen, which for centuries has been tied up with the ocean. If they now have to take out insurance to fish, what will that do? Or I can point to political complexities that may mean that a government is not willing to support or invest something itself. So that's the kind of expertise one can bring if you have the local knowledge. But also, I think we as humanities scholars have these critical thinking and nuanced analytical skills. Particularly, I think we pay a lot of attention to power relations, and that obviously is really crucial when it comes to considering sustainable interventions. We need to understand voices, whose voices are being heard when development projects are being considered, and whose voices are often excluded. And they tend to often be women, ethnic, racial minorities, people with disabilities. And, you know, these are often the voices that we as arts and humanities scholars pay attention to, especially literary scholars. Linked to that, I think what we also do, we pay a lot of attention to structures, to agency. I'm a social historian. I always consider the kind of structural forces that are at play that indicates what room people have to affect change in their own lives. What are the political structures? What are the economic conditions? And if you are a historian, one of the things that you can also point to in research around development is point to long-term factors, long-term cultural traditions, for example. We can point also to methods that have been adopted in the past that didn't work, and so prevent people from going down the same road, because if people don't have that historical knowledge, they might do something which we know will not succeed because there is evidence of that in the past. And also, I think one of the things that a lot of us are working on, and especially in my region, and as I say, I work on the Caribbean. One of the main problems that we face in the Caribbean is crime, and this is just some statistics of the crime rate there. So conflict is something that we can bring out, and we can understand some of these things. A colleague of mine works in Sheffield around violence in particularly a very small place called Trinidad. And what he's been doing, he's been working with the traditional art practices in the Caribbean, the spoken word traditions. And for the project that he's involved in about crime in Port of Spain, it is not where art comes in as, okay, we got this particular intervention that we're going to do in these communities, and now we're going to use art to tell them what we're doing. No, actually, they're using traditional spoken art traditions to generate knowledge, and particularly they're working with local young men to find out what they think about masculinity, about violence, and they do that by looking at music, popular music, particularly the kind of dancehall rap music. So there is art generating insight knowledge that maybe if you're just a straightforward political scientist interested in these things, you don't generate. And then I think another thing that I think we as arts and humanities scholars can do is to start to think about different futures for parts of the global south. Because if you really want to address these global challenges that I started my talk with, you have to sometimes really think about massive societal transformation. And in the literary sciences, that is something that is there a lot. There's a lot of utopian novels, for example, but increasingly, for example, around climate change, there's a lot of eco-criticism. And there are novels where people are imagining different futures for places that are featuring, that are experiencing climate change. So there's a lot that we can bring as arts and humanities scholars, and it comes at a time when the AHRC, in its latest 5-year plan, has really highlighted global challenges as a particular area it wants to fund. And these areas in particular, conflict prevention, education in conflict, humanitarian protection, and food cultures. And the recent call has just gone out again for another AHRC MSc call around just about the histories and cultures of food. It's also very likely, we're expecting, that there will be another 5 years of GCRF funding. So I think it should be a kind of a call for all of us in the arts and humanities to think about what we can do to address these global challenges, what skills, what knowledge we have that we can contribute. And I think, if I speak from my own experience, yes, I can bring a lot to it, but I also gain a lot from it. I have learned a lot from working from people across the natural and social sciences and the arts and humanities in various different projects. Minna, who is a research facilitator in the IGDC, she's present here as well. I'm present here, so if there was any information that you wanted about how you can get involved in development research, you can get in touch with us. I've also brought a couple of flyers that I'll leave on the chair there that you can pick up. But it would be really great to see more of you all get engaged and help to address some of these really, really crucial problems that the world faces today.
So that was a wonderful piece of advocacy and convincing. I'm just thinking, so often, like yourself, I've trained as a historian, and I'm thinking that so often people who work from other disciplines, whether it's science or social science, are impatient with that long view that you made the case for. And go say, yeah, but we've got problems we need to fix now. You have to be in the present. You have to think about the future. I'm just wondering what you would advise about the strategies for gaining greater recognition that to be effective in the present and future sometimes does require the longer view.
Yeah, so definitely, sometimes you do encounter that. Just to give a kind of an anecdote, on the insurance project, we work with this insurance broker, and we talked about, what data you have and some other agencies, and they said, oh, we have really historic data. It's like, great, great. And it went back to 1980, because that's when satellite images really became available. So it's different trajectories, what's historic. But there are people who really see the benefit of long-term thinking, partly because, we also can think about what knowledge, what experiences have people done in the past, and especially, around the area of climate change, like hurricanes. People have built houses in particular ways for a very long time. You can go back to it. So now increasingly people are open to that long-term thinking, especially as you have more availability of long-term data sets. So in a couple of the projects that I'm involved in, we go back at least 200 years. There may be gaps in the data, but you can go back often as long as that. But I do see that there's more openness, definitely more openness on that, from the more natural sciences to see, well, actually there can be things about that. And find out indeed, you know, practices in the past that have worked. Kate.
Thank you so much, Henrica, and thank you for all you do, flying the flag for the arts and humanities. I know how much advocacy you also do for our disciplines with our colleagues and other faculties. I wanted to ask you about partnership working with universities and academics in country, in the Global South, and what vision or role you see in arts and humanities communities in those places where these challenges are so much more readily apparent. What can we learn from them about their ways of working and their vision of how useful they are to their own contemporary society, rather than just presuming that, you know, which I know you absolutely don't, but we sort of parachute in and help them understand their own cultures. And
it is arts and humanities in a large part of the Global South in universities is not ranked as highly as other disciplines, but then again, is that so very different in the UK? You know, you can wonder about that as well. We might have a discussion later on about that. But what I found is, you know, to just bring out two projects. One is the project around food that I'm involved in with the University of the West Indies. And the other one is the University of Ghana, where we're working here, languages and linguistics, myself, working with people in the University of Ghana, which again, there is a mix of language, linguistics people and natural sciences. There is a real willingness to be on board of that. But it is about bringing together a project where, you know, yes, you're working towards some sort of a global challenge and address that, but at the same time being able to do your own discipline thing within that and get something out of it. And it's finding a balance in there where you can create data sets, like what we do with the Ghana project. You have interviews, which you can analyze in multiple ways. You can analyze it in what do people think and feel about this, but also from a more linguistic angle as well. So you can have both. But there is a willingness to get on board, definitely, and there is an appetite for it. But the interdisciplinarity, which we have become increasingly familiar with, is less common in a lot of Global South universities and arts and humanities faculties there.